To introduce Dr. Vijaya Krishnan, who is a certified professional midwife, the co-founder and director of the Healthy Mother Sanctum Natural Birth Center. And she will be taking questions in relation to her masterclass on non-pharmacological
I'm hoping that I'm audible
in labor.
I think we are live, and thank you for allowing me to come in here today and as a part of this fantastic conference. And I'm hoping that we will have a good discussion about the topic that was given to me, which is non-pharmacological pain relief options. So yes, I'm hoping that we'll have some good discussion surrounding it. This is, of course, a topic that's pretty close to my heart because I feel that women, when they have the ability to get the support that they need, the antenatal education that they need, and the internal mechanisms basically are all there. It's just that sometimes, and especially given the current scenario of birth, given that women are always told about labor equals pain, I think they come in with that preconceived sort of mental idea that labor equals pain, and how am I going to manage the pain? And they've heard these stories which primarily tell them that it's very hard to manage, and very often we see that go into the hospital, get an epidural. And I'm seeing on my in my chat box that there is already a question, and the first question is, are there any certified courses available to train obstetricians and obstetric nurses in this area of non-pharmacological pain relief? So primarily, I don't think that there are any specific courses only for that. However, we do have, at least as far as the courses that one of the courses that I conduct is basically to train Lamaze childbirth educators, because like I was talking about in the presentation, I wouldn't know how I would help women manage their birth without doing antenatal classes. So I think the whole idea of self-sufficiency, that yes, my body knows how to do this, and yes, I can have support systems around me in labor to help me birth with relative ease, comes from the idea that in the antenatal clinic and in the antenatal period, the woman and her partner and her family are able to prepare themselves. So we do run those courses for childbirth educators. There is a big component, at least one afternoon of it, where we essentially talk about comfort measures for labor and birth. And how we do that in the educator course is we tell them how to teach the parents. So if they know how to teach the parents, and essentially they have to know the comfort measures as well. So we do that. And over and above that, I do have like these afternoons when I do just only pain relief, options for labor and birth. So definitely something that, maybe at the end of this conversation, I can put up our email in the chat box, and you can write to us and we can do that. And it's also essential components of this also come with doula training. So I think a lot of it sort of goes side by side and hand in hand. But I do believe that once the obstetrician or the obstetric nurse or even the midwives attend the childbirth educator course, they feel so much more equipped. And I know that I've had many obstetricians attend the course. And one of the beauties of that is that they are then in a position of wonderful ability to actually translate that into care. Oftentimes, the childbirth educators are limited by what they can teach, and then that particular obstetrician or the hospital has to have policies to allow that, whereas the obstetrician themselves can actually implement that. So I think we definitely see that. So that would be one of the options. The second question that has come up in the chat box is, in the antenatal clinic, women come in saying, I want an epidural. As soon as you start talking about where they would like to give birth, how do you manage this question without giving an impression of being pushy on an agenda? Very, very important question. And I think part of it is also because we talk about what our practice is, right? So one of the things that I feel is a big advantage in a practice like ours is that people come in expecting that they are going to have a natural birth. I think in regular hospitals, until and unless they come in with some kind of prior research, there is going to be this little sort of moment when you have to educate them. And part of that education essentially means saying that, why do you want that epidural? Why do you think that you're going to be in that much pain? Why do you believe that your body is going to go from like a 0 to 100 without giving you some intuition? Another aspect which we talk about very often is, have you managed other kinds of pain, and what have you done that? How have you done that? So that kind of gives an opening. I also think this is a part of a larger problem, because women generally, especially in our country, when they come in with maybe 5 people around them. COVID has, of course, it has made a little bit of difference with that, and I think in a positive way. But many times they will come in and they are surrounded by their mom-in-law, maybe sometimes a grandmom, sometimes a brother and a husband, and sometimes I have to ask who is who, and so there is very little time and conversation that is had about why she is afraid or what are her needs, right? And then people around her are telling her, well, she's so delicate, she can't take an injection. And so then you have to dial back and say, okay, what is it that you fear about that injection? I think there is this larger component of making the woman sound weak. And I think the medical establishment has sometimes played into that. And sometimes it is the family that's playing into it. So it's a multi-layered phenomenon. But I think opening up those conversation avenues where you talk about, why do you think there is so much pain? What have you heard about pain? And how can we help you manage it? And yes, there are classes. I think these are sort of the conversations that you have, especially considering that most obstetricians and care providers have a 5-minute or a 10-minute time period. I know it's not a lot to explore, but at least it gives you an avenue to meet them in another space and help them to meet their expectations, because I feel a large portion of pain management is expectation management. The pain is a physical process, which essentially everyone feels differently. I might feel mild as one, and you might feel it as moderate or severe. But the expectation surrounding pain is what causes the suffering. And so that's where I think we have to kind of delineate the pain versus the suffering. I'm hoping I've answered that question. What is the scientific evidence behind giving I think it's sterile water injections? Okay, sterile water injections, the evidence is primarily the same thing as the pain gate theory, especially that because we are choosing that dermatome wherever the pain is. So most often, especially if it's a malpositioned baby, it's an OP baby, you have so much pain that's coming right from the back and wrapping around to the front. Or most often, I find people describing it as a starburst pain. Most often, I'll have them, kind of describing it as a pain that either is just radiating or it radiates upwards. And usually that pain that radiates upwards towards a flank or the other is usually more of a malpositioned asynclitic baby, or a baby with a deflexed head, versus just the plain starbirth being an OP baby. So essentially what we are doing with the sterile water injections is that we are kind of blocking out that dermatome. We are from that, it's basically 4 points that you pick out, and usually I kind of map it like a trapezoid, I think. And then we use those points. We, of course, talk to them about, yes, it's going to be terrifically painful initially, as in just that bee sting type sensation where you're just going to get four times very quickly, you're going to get that. But then the pain gate theory essentially works that from that portion, which has been sort of given that additional sensation of pain, from that it's kind of numbing the entire the actual pain sensation. And essentially it just works beautifully for about maybe an hour or an hour and a half sometimes, and then the pain starts to come back. So I kind of call it an epidural without the other effects, because what I use it for then is to work with them to let the baby change its position. It is not that you're giving it and sitting. you're utilizing that part where the pain is less so that the pelvic floor muscles get relaxed. She feels more relaxed. She's able to move better. Oftentimes, she can go into the water tub after that, and that helps her to relax. And sometimes we forget how good that relaxation is in order to help with dilation as well. And then if you know that the baby is sort of malpositioned, you can utilize that time window to work with positions to help the baby rotate and descend. Are there any contraindications in literature to using aromatherapy oil? Not direct contraindications, but definitely I think anyone, and I'm not super good with aromatherapy. I just know 1 or 2 or 3 of them, and I often use them. I do a lot of homeopathics. I love homeopathics, both in terms of managing the energy channels, managing pain, letting the baby rotate. I do a lot of that, but I'm not great with aromatherapy. So what I would do is to look at it and say, is this particular oil that you're using sort of contraindicated for a particular kind of person, their mental state, and or there are some oils which we know are contraindicated for pregnancy per se. So essentially going between, like, the 2 most common ones that I think we use very routinely are lavender and frankincense, and kind of going between that is pretty much okay. But I don't know the honest answer to all the oils because I'm not used to using that. Sorry, I did something. I think I actually got out of it. Sorry. Okay, I'm back again. Sorry, I think I did something odd and then it seemed like everything was okay. So let's see what is the next question here. Are you following a 2 or 4 injection technique for sterile water injection? I do the 4 injection technique. It just covers a larger dermatomal area. That's all that is. Have you used nitrous oxide and is it safe? Definitely safe. I think one of the beauties of nitrous oxide, I don't use it a lot. We have it at hand. We often use it for a short period of time when that woman is panicking. And after we have tried everything, we have tried the water, we have tried, focus, we have tried doing all those things, and still the woman's panicking. I think it works wonderfully, especially as she's in that in-between stage transition to pushing. And if she's extremely panicked, works great. It is sort of self-modulating because she can use her mask and then breathe in as soon as the contraction comes, and once the contraction's done, she takes it off. The beauty of nitrous oxide is that it exits the system amazingly fast. So I think, like, as soon as she takes it off, before the next contraction comes, oftentimes it's gone. So yes, there is enough literature telling us that nitrous oxide is safe, and it's very safe in the way that it is used, especially for labor and birth. The only thing that I have found very often with use of nitrous oxide for long periods of time, the woman gets extremely dry mouthed and dry nose, and everything is pretty much dry. And the other thing is that she feels a little bit, it's like the initial part is actually good. I call it kind of la la land because she's in that stage where she feels sort of there but not there, and she's able to relax and manage the pain. And like I said, it gives her a tool. She is in control of how much to use, when to use. But then she sometimes she feels a little feeling of nausea and vomiting. That's the only thing that I've felt with, like a longer use of nitrous oxide. I also think nitrous oxide is wonderful to use if there is suturing going on, and even with the local anesthesia, the woman's very sort of panicky, sort of wants to pull back. Using nitrous oxide at that time works out really quite well without having to resort to more other kinds of pain medications. What else do we have here? What percentage of women respond to non-medicated pain relief? Well, in my sample of, convenience, because of that's what I know of, I would say a good 98% is respond to non-medicated pain relief. We have very few women asking for medications. We have very few women asking. We have had 8 epidurals in almost 1,500 births. So I think it's like, and most of them have been a longer drawn out labor, somebody who has been unable to manage it, someone whom we have thought would really, the baby is coming, but everything has been tried and we have suggested it. And really, I think very, very few. I think the key is antenatal preparation. The key is us being there around, and key is one-to-one support. Of course, without that, the woman sort of would give up, especially in these longer labors when they need the additional help. I think they would give up without that one-to-one, sort of hand holding, suggesting different positions, encouraging them. All that is an equal part of pain relief, the emotional part of pain relief, at least. How does not taking medication affect birth? I'm not sure what the person over here is asking, but I don't know if it is coming from a view of whether they are saying that not medicating would affect birth, and whether it is like the woman feels it as overly painful. Not sure about that. But I think the more the medications that we don't use, obviously it also means that there is going to be less of intervention in terms of the hormones. So the hormonal physiology of birth is one where there is this beautiful symphony, right? So you have the oxytocin and you have the endorphins, and then you have the catecholamines. Yesterday, you heard so many of the speakers talk about that, and the catecholamines coming in right at that stage where it is required. But when these catecholamines come in too early, when the woman's feeling left alone in emotional suffering, when nobody is telling her what to do, that is the time when the labor gets prolonged. So if it makes sense, not taking medications and doing the birth, especially with good support systems, actually enhances the progress of labor. But not taking anything and a woman screaming in pain can sometimes, disrupt labor, and not sometimes, many times disrupt labor and make it more prolonged. I'm hoping I answered that question. During this pandemic, did you feel any restrictions in the way you supported women with PPE, masks, hazmats, and limitations based on touch and close contact? Okay, so I have to be very honest. We used PPEs in the very beginning. I mean, we used PPEs. I mean, I'm not saying that we didn't use your typical mask and gown and your gloves and so on and so forth. But we didn't use the hazmat suits. Once we went past that, I would say maybe like April, May. I'm not even sure when exactly we stopped it, but at that point we just figured out that it was okay. We were having these women come in. We were strictly screening them. We landed up having a lot of the protocols placed in terms of one person in with the mother, the same person goes out with the mother, and so we landed up feeling fairly confident that in our smaller population that we could manage without that, and so we didn't. And again, as a midwife, I completely get whoever this person is asking, because to all of us who does this, we all want that touch. We want that, that holding, the hand, the rubbing that we offer. And honestly, when I enter the room, if I don't touch the person, I sort of feel disconnected, and that oxytocin sort of goes back and forth, I feel. And that's how you manage the labor. Imagine just sitting with all that protective gear somewhere, and the woman's, sort of left by herself and not having that touch. So I feel that we have been blessed in that manner. And I can only imagine how hard it has been for people who have to do that day in and day out and yet support them. Okay, here is the next thing. Have you birthed COVID positive women? If so, then what were the main differences in your care, especially in massage? Okay, so no, we did not have to birth any COVID positive women. The plan was always that if somebody tested positive, that we would have to have other, have them in, in a separate room and use all of those things. And we were also very clear that depending on how it was, we had these conversations that we might have to transfer them into another facility which was more equipped to deal with COVID, because I think that was very clear from us that initially we did not know what we were heading into, like most of us. And then when we had some sort of an idea, then we also talked to these women that in case something like that happens, we might have to transfer you to a facility, which is sad as it is, because obviously you've built this 9-month sort of rapport with them, and then to suddenly say, but I also think they understood that they would also be safer there because they would have a different level of care. What is the principle of a rebozo? Okay, very quickly, and I'm looking at the timer here because we have 11 minutes. So what's the principle of a rebozo? Rebozo, I think, works in beautiful ways. I think it can be used right from relaxing, and there are many Rebozo workshops conducted around the world. We teach a little bit of Rebozo even in our childbirth educator practice. We talk about that with the parents as well. Sometimes when the baby is malpositioned, or when the woman's having excessive pain, or when you have a belly which is more protuberant and sort of pendulous belly, we teach them how to use it. But the principle is essentially that the scarf essentially takes off the pressure from especially in a laboring mom, and allows her to relax. So you can use it in so many ways: hands and knees, forward leaning, gently sifting, which allows all her the muscles to relax. I even use it like sometimes her leaning forward and using on her buttocks side to side to relax the buttocks, similar to shaking the apple tree, which is described by Ina May Gaskin, where you sort of do that little rub down from the entire thigh down to her, so one side the midwife or the doula, and one side the husband can do that little rubbing down. So similar to that, the Rebozo can be used more, I would say, ergonomically and more effectively by just doing that on her buttock muscles, and then everything relaxes. So that works really nicely. Pain relief with a Rebozo with a woman in somewhat in, like a inclined sitting position. You can literally hold up her hip and sort of squeeze it together, sort of like a double hip squeeze. Again, more ergonomic, more effective, and then a little bit of sifting. So different ways that you can use a Rebozo. You can use it along with a birth ball. You can use a Rebozo around yourself for the woman to hold and pull against with pushing. So lots of uses of it. Essentially, it's a long cloth, and essentially the origins of it, the way it is taught, were from Mexico. So there's a lot of indigenous teaching that has gone from their side, but then you can utilize it in many ways if you are, if you're creative enough, because it's actually this is like an unlimited possibility in the way that you can utilize it. Next question. Most women feel epidural is not that bad even after looking at its positives and negatives, mainly because they see around them that babies eventually turn out fine as they grow, at least not very negative impact. How can we better explain that to them? Rama, thank you for the question. You are a part of our team. And so I know these questions get asked to you as a childbirth educator very often. So yes, I think we are never going to demonize anything. We are definitely telling them that epidural is not the worst thing in the world. It's not the end of the world. But I think the explanation really is going to be, how can we make you an active part of the process? Because epidurals at some point do land up not allowing the woman the ability to move as freely. Of course, like even with a lighter epidural, you may be able to, make the bed sort of in a way that the woman can be supported up to squat. We have done that. She can be on her side. We can change positions. It's not so much about the mother and the baby. It's about what she needs to understand, that there is one way where she can be more active, more mobile, feel that the birth is her own and go forward with that. Or she can be more in that position where somebody else has to help her. Because once you have gone down that route of epidural, there is only a finite way to progress it. Of course, the other thing that happens, which I often talk about in the class, is that that at some point the epidural effect starts to go away, and eventually you have to feel the sort of the additional pain or the pressure, or say supposing your epidural is worn out as 9 or 9.5 centimeters. I know that anesthetists can then regulate it or down regulate it and give it in a little lower dose, but then suddenly you have felt pain of lesser intensity at say 5 centimeters, and then now you're feeling this extraordinary pain at 9 centimeters, and you don't know what to do. So I just feel like when the body does its own thing, it has that graded way of going from less pain to more pain to more pain, and then the endorphins come in likewise. And so I think the internal management of that pain is much better as compared to someone who has got that and then suddenly lands up feeling extraordinary pain for whether it's at 9 centimeters or pushing. So I think it becomes a little disconnected process for them. But can it be used without great harm to moms or babies? Sure, it can. But I think that's the way to explain it to them. Are the 4 points for sterile water injection related to the points for TENS. Not necessarily, can be, but not necessarily. I think I often use it to where the mom's feeling, and mostly it is in the lowermost part. That's where it is mostly, but I've also used it at a slightly higher dermatome to help, and that's sort of where it is at. Have you noticed any decrease in cesarean rates in these women who had sterile water in labor? Of course, I'm just saying generally our cesarean rates are very low, but I think that difference between them feeling that relief and allowing them to move through different positions and getting the baby into a better position is the difference between a non-progressing and a progressing labor, and a woman who can handle it versus a woman who cannot handle it. So I would say definitely it probably makes a difference in the cesarean section. And remember, I don't use sterile water injections for everybody. I would say maybe in an year there might be maybe 3 or 4 people I would use it for. It's not everyone. It's not for everyone. Many of them, even with slightly malpositioned babies, manage just beautifully even without that. To me, that's the place where I feel the woman stuck despite everything that we have done, and she's really feeling enormous amounts of pain and not able to focus on letting go and relax, and that's where I would offer it. Did you already try to do acupressure in the same point of injections, or functions from Carla? Acupressure point, sometimes we do. Again, not something that I do very often or regularly. I do it to the extent that we have the knowledge for. But I feel, again, a lot of it, whenever we do points, I feel it, or any kind of pain relief, I feel it has to be in conjunction with people doing other things. And so, of course, the acupressure points are great, but we also do these other things to help them with the pain as well, if that makes sense. Going into a shower, going into the tub, all those things sort of play together. How often do you do narcotics for pain relief? Which narcotic is the best to use in the labor room from your experience? We honestly don't do a lot of narcotic medications. Tramadol is probably the closest we get to, using for pain relief, but not a lot. This is not something that we do regularly. Again, I think in our population, people come, with the expectation that somebody will be there to help them with other things, and they are there to help themselves. The partner is there to help themselves. So we don't have to use a lot of narcotics at all. What is your advice for overcrowded public hospital midwives? How do poor women can benefit? Wonderful, wonderful question, because I think it's what one woman can do, all women can do. And that's what Sister Morningstar says. And I think it's such a wise woman quote. I think, again, but what one woman can get afforded, every woman should also get afforded. So I think having the labor room, and now with all these quality improvement measures coming from the government of India and also across the world, I think there are doulas available, and there are midwives who are trained in this. If you have given her and her partner some amount of tools to manage labor pain, whether it's hypnobirthing, whether it is just pain management, other physical pain management measures, relaxation, chanting, all of those things come into play. Those are things that nobody can take away from public hospital midwives. Then the only other change that they would have is the numbers that they have to deal with compared to somebody like us who has a more one-to-one or slightly maybe 1-to-2 approach, And I think if they are given the basic tools that, okay, managing, helping them, go and sitting with them for maybe half an hour or 15 minutes even, and helping them or show the partner, this is what you can do. And then you'll end up giving them some tools where they don't feel that they are not being engaged, where they don't feel that they are what shall we say, that nobody's paying them attention. I think that's really what would be my first thing. But again, some amount of antenatal education, if that can be given, even in a group setting. It doesn't take very long to show somebody how to do a hip press. It doesn't take very long to show somebody how to use a simple massage and a hot water bag, and allowing them to understand. And I think this is the key. I think allowing them to understand that it is not the contraction that's longer, but the relaxation that is longer until the very end actually helps them understand that it's okay, it'll come and go, and then I'll have a nice period of relaxation. Okay, I think we are almost out of time. It says there is 2 minutes left, and I think Tammy is joining the session now. And I think I have been able to answer most questions, I think. So thank you all very much for this wonderful session and participation. I think I talked like a million miles a minute. I tried to get over as many questions as possible, and I'm happy to answer any of your other questions. If you can ping me later or put it in the chat box, I'll try and do it later. And I'm sure that there will be other opportunities where we can, sort of interact. Thank you very much.